Whether it be coming across humanoid creatures that you've never seen before, or possibly encountering some pretty creepy Sasquatch clans, these stories from subscribers just like you will surely freak you out. If you have a story that you'd like to share on the channel, be sure to send it to the email or the website that you can find in the description down below. Let's get into these tales that'll truly freak you out. Some of these really gave me some chills. This happened to me about 15 years ago, when I used to live in Park Ridge, Illinois. There was a lake not far from my house near a forest preserve called Belleau Lake, which was a popular fishing spot. There was a gravel path that ringed the lake, which is about a mile in the area. And at the far end of the lake, furthest from the parking lot when you pull off the main road, there was a forested area, whichever way you went, called Belleau Woods. I used to enjoy jogging around the lake in the early morning or late afternoon, just before the preserve closed. This one day, it was beautifully sunny and fairly warm. I got into the far end of the lake where the forest began and really needed to pee. The outhouse was by the parking lot on the opposite end, and since I didn't see anyone fishing except right by the shallower end near the parking lot, where I saw a couple of older guys, I found an opening in the woods and took the dry mud path about 20 feet in or so and looked for a tree to do my thing. I noticed how quiet it was in the woods. No birds, no rushing of the cars from the nearby highway. I could almost hear my own breathing. I finished up and turned back on the path when I felt a strange feeling like I wasn't alone. Although I couldn't see anyone, and also it began to feel ominous, and the air on the back of my neck started to stand on end. I took the path around a bend where a large pine tree stood, and came around the corner to see something that was burned into my mind. About 10 to 12 feet down the path was something that looked all black, sort of shaped like an old-fashioned bedsheet ghost. Touching the ground, and no features I could make out, but it swayed to the left and then to the right, again and again like a pendulum. I guessed it to be about 6 feet tall, maybe a foot or so wide, very black, like ink. It made no sound whatsoever. After about what felt like minutes, but was probably not even a minute, I noticed it was now closer than it originally was to me, though I don't recall seeing it move, and I know I didn't move. It had stopped swaying and was standing motionless. It took all I could to gather my wits, turn my back on it, and race down the path, hoping to find the opening in the woods that I came in, which I did in record time. I was momentarily blinded by the sunshine outside the woods, but kept running down the path ringing the lake, not daring to look behind me, until I got to the parking lot and into my car. Only then did I see if it had followed me. But of course, I didn't see anything. I had no clue what I had just seen, but I was shaking still, and I had to calm down for a few minutes before I could drive. I did go back to Lake Belleau after that jog a couple more times, but never again have I dared to go back into those woods after that experience. First, some backstory and introduction to my surroundings. I come from a small fishing village in the south of Iceland called Eyjarbakki. I regularly go to black sand beaches around my town to pick up seashells, mussels, crabs, etc. Our town has a population of 570 people, but just to the north of us is Selfoss with about 7,000 people. This sighting happened during the winter of 2016 and 2017, which was a cold one. The part of Iceland that I live in is flat and it has no vegetation, only flat open fields, which allows the wind to pick up, especially when the wind direction is from the north. This winter was not that snowy, but it was windy and cold. On this day, it was sunny and there was no wind, but it was a good -9 degrees Celsius, or 15.8 degrees Fahrenheit. This was a perfect day to go to search for some shellfish or crabs waiting for the high tide in small ponds that form. I jumped on my four-wheeler at first light, which was around 11:03 that day. I only had about 4.5 hours of daylight at that time, so I was going well over the speed limit on the national highway that connects my town to the port. On that road, you cross a 400-meter-long bridge over the Offlusa River as it meets the ocean. I went off-road about 1 kilometer from the bridge, and then eventually I reached the beach. The beaches here are dangerous because the waves are huge, but I pushed on. Nothing weird happened at all until about 2 a.m., when I started hearing growling and whining type sounds that a dog would make. I brushed it off as a fox or a mouse, as they are common around the area. When the sun was starting to set below the mountains to my west, I walked back to my four-wheeler. I had walked a few hundred meters away from it, and on my back I was picking up bags full of clams and crabs that I had laid down so I wouldn't have to carry them while I was looking for more. As I came upon one bag, I saw that it was torn open. I didn't know what had done it, but I assumed it was a seal or a fox. But as I came closer to the last bag, I saw a giant four-legged creature come out from the waves and dash towards the back like it was an injured dog trying to run, but it was way bigger, and it had an extreme hump on its back. I was still walking, but I slowly stopped as I looked at it, and it looked at me. It made a noise that a seal would make. It took my bag and ran back into the ocean. At that time, I was not scared, I was just shocked. As I was loading up everything, tying my stuff onto my four-wheeler, I heard the same sound at least a few more times. I turned around and I felt my whole body go numb. This thing was easily 3 to 4 feet long. It was about probably 4 foot 8 inches tall. I knew instantly what I had seen, so I jumped on my four-wheeler and sped off. I stopped at some point to look back only to see 3 of these things running towards me. I did the same thing as before, but I never stopped until I got home. My fingers were almost frostbitten because I left my gloves, and it was -17 degrees Celsius or 1 degrees Fahrenheit by that time. At home, most people believed me. Us Icelanders are very superstitious, and that Sunday, I went to church to pray for me to never see that thing again. This story happened to a guy who works at my local gun store, way back in 1976. Please keep in mind that the gun laws in 1970s Canada versus 2018 Canada were drastically different to the point where civilians owned and used machine guns regularly. Let's begin. For safety reasons, because this man still owns those weapons under register and license, I will be changing his name to John for the purpose of the story. It was July of 1976. John had closed up gun shop for the week to take a break and go camping with his friends to a regular spot they went yearly. They were going camping in the Canadian Rocky Mountains, which are a beautiful place to be. He took with him 2 co-workers from the shop at the time and 2 other close family friends. They packed some beers and of course their guns and tents. They set out on a 4-hour drive north and arrived later that day at around noon or 1 o'clock. They drove their trucks down some forestry roads for a good 30 kilometers into the backwoods. This was because despite machine guns being legal, police and conservation officers at the time would still often bother you if you were using them. They got in and began to pitch their tents, which mainly consisted of old World War II or Korean War military tents, and stored their firearms and tents with them in a large box. They spent the day doing some shooting at just about whatever they wanted with the exception of live animals. A few beers later, and a cooked dinner, they decided to pack it in for the night at around 11 p.m. The first night, none of the men woke up. However, when they woke up around 7 a.m., they found a huge amount of grass in the clearing that they had set up in the area pressed down. The trail of that grass leading up into the bush was directly to their north as well. This raised a few eyebrows, but they attributed it to deer. During the day's hiking to some shooting spots, they stumbled upon a bog in the middle of the trail, which had not been there the year before. In the mud, they noticed a very large footprint, just shy of being 2 feet long, imprinted in the mud at the edge of the bog. Upon further inspection of the area, they could see the faint outline of the same size footprint almost 5 feet behind it in the dry ground. The footprints continued straight into the bog and out the other side. John and his friends were packing serious firepower at the time. John was carrying a Belgian-made FN-FAL battle rifle. All men carried automatic weapons except for one, so they seemed very confident in dealing with an angry animal if it attacked. They continued on and into a valley about 1 kilometer away. While walking down the valley, they caught a glimpse of something peeking down at them from above a ridge. About 3 minutes of walking, a large boulder about the size of a pizza box came down flying at them with great speed, which was followed by a noise John said he could never forget, which was a blood-curdling scream and growl. Coming from down the valley floor, further away, was another scream, which replied to the first. The men quickly turned back, realizing that there was 2 of them, as all of them loaded their magazines and ammunition into their weapon. They made it back to their clearing by sundown, only to find that their tents had been torn to shreds and everything was scattered about their camp and torn open. One of the trucks had also had a smashed back window and huge dent in the side door, which rendered it useless and unopenable. The men quickly pierced together and began to figure out what was happening. John had always been a believer in Bigfoot and was now positive that they were dealing with one. About a minute later, a friend of John's raised his AKM assault rifle and fired a few shots to the other side of the clearing, saying he saw something huge and black run behind a fallen tree over the top of a ditch. The men then fired a huge volley of gunfire into the tree and suppressed the ditch and tree. As the fire stopped, the same kind of scream was heard from behind the fallen tree. At that moment, from the east of the clearing, a huge creature stepped into it. John described it as being 7 to 8 feet tall and was covered in pitch black hair. It was heavily matted. Its face was ape-like according to him. He estimated that the creature weighed easily 600 pounds. Without hesitation, John fired his FAL at it. Now, for anyone who has a lot of knowledge of firearms, knows that the FAL fires a very large 7.62 x 51mm bullet. On full auto, the weapon was hard to control, but John estimated that at least 5 of his shots connected, not to mention the barrage of bullets from 5 men, which 4 of whom had machine guns, quickly cut this creature down. He claimed to have killed it. The sight was something to see, he said, as the creature had been hit over 45 times by various calibers of bullets that were designed to kill humans, and nothing else, as they were made for military weapons. All the men immediately jumped into their trucks and sped off to get a forest ranger from the nearest station. Upon returning to the next morning, the body was gone. However, the ruins of their camp were still there, along with an incredible amount of blood left from the creature. It was 25 years ago. I lived on the reservation with my family, and I was out with some friends. We went down to the creek to have a day of reed picking. We were enjoying listening to the sounds of nature. I couldn't resist trying to catch a little frog that I saw. I reached out to catch it, and it hopped away, as I was expecting. I started back and fell forward, and I think I might have even sprained my ankle. I tried to get up, but I couldn't because my foot had swelled really bad. I couldn't even take my shoe or sock off at this point. My friends came over to sit with me and figured out how we were going to get back to the adobe. There were 7 of us, and we were all too scared to walk back alone, due to our parents told us never to leave each other at any cost. We were trying to think of what we could do, and we were at a loss. We went silent, and that's when we noticed that all around the animals were silent as well. We thought nothing of it and continued to think about life and how we were going to get back to the adobe. I was apologizing for the 100th time when we heard a noise. I jumped and screamed out of pain. One of my friends grabbed my arm and told me to put my weight on her shoulders, and then the other friend joined her. I'm between my 2 friends limping along the pathway when we hear another noise, kinda like a fire popping noise, and yet no fire around for a half a mile. Well, we stopped and we listened, and then a smell so bad and nauseating overcame us. I'm not even sure how it smelled kinda dead and rotted, yet like a fresh metallic smell mixed with a little bit of garbage. What I'd say is that we were definitely puzzled, as it ain't no Bigfoot, nor was it any wildlife we knew that smelled like that. We were really scared. My friend Scotty decided he was going to investigate. He was going to try to find out what was causing that nauseating smell. We were fixing to argue with him when the smell became so strong we all vomited and we couldn't breathe without the overwhelming, disgusting, nauseous feeling overwhelming us. You may think I'm nuts at this point, but I'm telling you this right now. This is the Great Spirit, our Creator's honest truth. When I was able to stop my nauseating and vomiting, I looked up between my friend's shoulders and saw the most horrifying thing I have ever seen in my life. Right on the hill, from us about 1.5 yards away, stood what I can only describe as a skinwalker. He was staring towards us and making hardly any sound at all. We'd been warned about them and knew we were going to have to get away from there. I decided, pain or not, I was going to suck it up and run as best as I could. I wasn't going to let my friends go down because of me. I let go of their shoulders, I took a deep breath, and I started to run as fast as I could. I really didn't know how or why, but I was confused and focused on running from him. But I barely felt the pain in my ankle at this point. We were all at a dead run down the path across the fields and finally reached the adobe. We ran in gasping for breath, and my mom and my friends' moms looked up at us asking what had happened. Why are we so freaked out, running as the hounds had been after us? Well, Sarah caught her breath first and started to ramble on about what happened. I started calming down and collapsed. I cringed from my sprained ankle. My mom came over with Mary Ann, my cousin's sister-in-law, and both started to work on my ankle. I got chided for being clumsy and trying to mess with wildlife. I was so badly in pain I wanted to scream. I asked if I could have some water, and my mom gave me a little bit and told me to drink slowly, as I get sick if I drink too fast. My sister and brothers came in and were told to get to the healing herbs from the shaman. I was passing in and out of awareness, and I could barely see bits and pieces of my friends telling their stories about our ordeal. I must have passed out. When I woke up, I was in bed and my mom was sitting in a corner, churning bread to cook for dinner. She immediately came to my bedside and said the shaman had been here to see me, and he said I'll be fine, and we all should be more careful when we go out there. He doesn't think we were affected by the bad spirits. I still wonder to this day who that skinwalker was, and what it wanted with us. You may not believe me, but I will tell you that don't speak or talk about anything like this. It will possess you, and possibly kill you. This story was told to me by my parents as a kid. My parents grew up in a small town in the northernmost part of Jefferson County in Alabama. Now back in those days our town was very small, and around the late 60s and early 70s there wasn't much to do. One night, they had driven down below the bridge off of Locust Fork River, where teens would often gather. This night, no one was there yet, so they decided to wait and see who'd possibly show up. While waiting, Dad heard a slight whistling sound. He didn't pay much attention to it at first, but as time went on, it got louder and louder. Dad moved the car up the hill a little, under a streetlight, and got out as they started sounding like a little kid. Once out of the car, he could tell it was coming from the woods, down on the riverbank, and sounded like it was coming closer. He said it didn't stick around to see what it was because they left in a hurry, feeling pretty freaked out from that. The following Sunday, a friend asked if he minded going to see him and retrieving his boat that they had left on the river from a trot lining trip from Friday night. They had left the boat on the bank at one of the guy's land that pooled the bottom of the river. Dad and the guy had to troll up the river to bring down both the boats. While going up the river, they came upon an abandoned campsite. Dad said it was very strange and looked as if someone left in a hurry. The tent was knocked down, the fire was still smoldering, an axe was in the tree, coolers and other items were scattered around. But oddly, no one was there. It's as if they had left quickly, leaving everything behind. The friend of my dad made light of the empty campsite and said that whistling creature must have run them off. That's when my dad turned to him and asked him to repeat what he had just said. The friend laughed and said, "Yeah, we had some kind of crazy animal spook us a little Friday night." He said they had gotten all set up, all the lines out, and were just sitting in the boat, tied to the bank, waiting for the right time to run the lines. He said something crossed the river, was making a sound, that same very whistling sound. He said it went down a little while, and then they didn't pay attention to it at first, but as they got ready to run the lines, the animal started following the boat down the river. He said it would come down to the water's edge, and one of the three guys who had 22 rifle for snakes, he would shoot up into the woods and the animal would go deeper, but would immediately return crashing down to the edge. He said it made all types of noises, crashing through the brush. He said it spooked them enough to call it quits early and leave the boat tied on the farm's land. That's when Dad shared with him the experience he and my mom had just a few miles down the road. No one ever associated the whistling sound with Bigfoot until a few days ago. I was watching Destination America, Terror in the Woods Season 1 Episode 3, Hunted by Bigfoot. In that show, the men both mentioned a whistling sound, also describing a sound like as if it were air leaving a tire. When I heard this recorded, and my dad, who was 67, came and watched, the look on his face afterward was priceless. He said, "That was 47 years ago," almost as if he was stunned to hear someone describe a similar creature sound like that today. I'm not sure if it was a relief to hear someone else tell a similar story that occurred in Ohio, or if it was a story he had never heard being associated with Bigfoot. Either way, my parents were very honest Christians, and lying is a no-no. What is, we may never truly know, but what it could have possibly been, well, that's just scary. I live in a very rural Appalachian area. By very rural, I mean my nearest neighbor is a mile away. Now, I had never been one to believe in anything other than what's been scientifically discovered. I'm more of a logical man myself. At least I was. I was home alone one night. It was the summer, as I remember the day had been a scorching hot one. I was 16 at the time and a cocky teenager, thinking I was a Superman, and nothing scared me at all. I sat at home, since my parents weren't really there and wouldn't return for at least an hour and a half. I sat there on my phone as I heard my Rottweiler going nuts outside, which was something new as she hardly ever barked for an extended amount of time. I stepped onto our porch and walked onto our yard looking for what she was going on about, and saw every bit of nothing as I stood there. I was gazing at the sky, just looking at the stars and the moon, and how it was really bright that night. That's when I heard this sound that sent chills up my spine and made my hair stand on end. This howling that started low, almost a growling noise, steadily got higher to the point where it sounded like a woman wailing. I knew what my dog had been barking at as I looked into our freshly cut hayfield. I could see the silhouette of a tall figure darting through the tree line that surrounds the field. Its strides were carefully placed, almost robotic-like, and it moved fastly, faster than any human ever could. I bolted into the house, called my parents, and told them to come home straight away. This thing was there, right beside our house. Whatever this thing was, it knew I was there before I even saw it. I had nightmares for months about it. I heard stories about Bigfoot having a spiritual connection with the land, and had never believed them. But after seeing and hearing it, and having nightmares about the beast long after the encounter, I'm a true believer that something is always out there watching us, just beyond the tree line. I was walking home from my grandparents' house a couple months ago, and it was getting dark really quick. So I thought it would be quicker to use the old railroad track to get to town. I've walked this track my whole life, but I've always hated walking it at night. It starts off quite peaceful. There is nothing like the sound of the creek flowing beside the track. When I finally passed the first bridge, what's left of it at least, all of a sudden, everything seems to go quiet. So I stop and slowly look around me. I saw nothing, but I have this heavy feeling like I'm being watched. A little ways down the track behind me, I hear something moving towards me. At first, I thought it was my cousin trying to scare me, but he drove home. I started sprinting, and I ran for a while. Then, I hear a man's voice from the tree line scream, "Isa!" This means stop in Choctaw. When I heard it, my heart rate increased dramatically. I felt it in my ears. I didn't want to look, but I did anyway. I couldn't see anything because it was pitch black. All I could see was this dark figure. It was darker than the shadows, and it was sitting next to a tree. Growing up, my grandma used to always tell us about dark spirits and dark entities in the woods. She used to tell us how to tell the difference between the good and the bad ones. The feeling I had when I looked directly at it made me want to run as fast as I could, so that's what I did. When I finally reached the second bridge, I heard it laughing behind me. At this point, I thought I'm tired of running, so I stopped and turned on the flashlight. And I turned around and I felt sick to my stomach. I felt weak and dropped to my knees. I no longer had the strength to hold myself up. As I looked at the stars, I thought whatever this thing was, it had to be strong to make me fall to my knees. I was so close to town, I could hear the highway. As I lay there, I thought, damn, I guess this is how I die. I heard it laugh again, but this time it sounded like it was far away. My strength came back, so I quickly got up and ran. When I got into town, I called my cousin to pick me up and take me home. On the way home, I told him everything that happened. At first I thought he was going to say that I was crazy and laugh, but he didn't say anything and he just drove. When we finally got to the road that my house was on, he stopped the truck. Then he said the same thing that happened to his father when he was fishing a couple of weeks before it happened to me. For some context, this wasn't my personal experience, but my father's. We live in New England, in a house next to a road surrounded by woods, barring some acres of clearing for farms and stuff like that. A few years ago, my dad was up pretty late one night and went outside on the porch to get some fresh air. He was leaning against the railing out on the road when he saw a humanoid figure emerge from the woods on the opposite side of the road and bound across it. He said that it went into our neighbor's property and through the woods beyond it. When it was out of sight, he could still hear it running through the brush. according to my dad. It was really lanky and skinny. It could have been about 7 feet tall. It had human-like features and was completely bald all over. He said that his skin looked like a whitish tan color, but he can't be 100% sure. We're all still a little spooked and curious about what this thing might be, so if anybody has any insight, I would love to know. Much appreciation to you guys for watching this video as always. If you enjoyed it, hit that like button as it really helps the videos grow. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, as I upload videos similar to this one every single day. If you want to support the channel beyond that, there is merch that you can check out in the description down below. I have tons of cool shirts that are based off the series that you hear on this channel. If you have a story that you'd like to share to hear in a future video, be sure to send it to the email or the website that you can find in the description down below. I would love to have you guys comment down below telling me what you think some of these creatures could be. It seems like we had a good mix of them this episode. Thanks guys for watching as always, and I'll see you with another creepy video.